I grew up in suburban New York City, and there were little patches of woods here and there, but all the land was spoken for in a sense. It was very cultivated. So I might find some patch of woods near a reservoir or near a golf course or something. And I believe for some reason in my childhood imagination, it was always fantasizing about wilderness and also about the past, about pre-modern life, before cars. I thought about riding horses places. I thought about exploring wilderness. And this became a sort of mental obsession of mine as a child. I would climb trees. In the suburbs, that's often a really good way to get away. You get to the very top of a tree and you can sort of eliminate all the houses and roads and cars and shopping centers and all the crap that I was trying to get away from. We didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, but you could get in the car and you could drive out to some remote area like in New Hampshire or something and go fishing, or drive up to Canada. And without a tremendous expense, you could rent a small cabin on a lake. These cabins had my father would rent no electricity, no running water. The lake was crystal clear. This is in Quebec. And we would go in the summers. And you would portage to them. You would paddle across a lake and then carry the boat to the next lake and all your stuff, and then paddle across another lake and keep going until you were far away. And this was my dreamland when I was a kid, to go to these places with. So I was introduced to it early on, and I was made to feel that it was a virtue to know the names of the birds and the names of the plants and the names of the animals. And to understand how to get around in the woods, to know how to camp, to feel that sort of capabilities in the woods. My love for animals was a part of that. It was the first encounters as a child with a moose in Canada, or seeing a coyote run across the road or something, a bobcat or something. These were thrilling moments. And catching snakes. I was never afraid of them. I always picked them up. There's very few poisonous snakes in New England. There are some rattlesnakes here, but you don't pick them up. Anyhow, I would keep animals in my home. When I was a child growing up, if I caught a snake, I would take it home and put it in a terrarium for a week or so and just study it and draw it and think about it and then let it go. And I raised a wild bird for one summer and then I brought her back to where I found her. And I used to trap birds in my backyard. I would put a cardboard box with a stick and a string and a peanut butter sandwich under there, and a blue jay would go under, and I would pull the string, boom, and I would have a blue jay for one day biting my hand and just sort of holding it and then let it go. So this was my activity as a child. It was like I wasn't something that I thought about. It's not an intellectual thing. I was just drawn to it immediately, like love at first sight. I I see my project as kind of a literary project as well as an artistic project. So most of the ideas I have for paintings I get from something I've read. So I do have a pretty vast library, and it's growing all the time. I I can't even sleep unless I read. So every night I have a few hours before I go to sleep that I read. So it's this sort of voracious thing. I read all the time. I'm often reading with the idea that I might get an idea for a picture, but sometimes they come from surprising places. A painting that was very literary that I just did for a show that I had in Paris with Max Hetzler was a painting called How Many Foxes Are There in England? And this painting was based very directly on a literary source. It was the writer's diary of Virginia Woolf. And on her 48th birthday, she saw two different foxes. And one was running in the rain, and the other was barking in the sun. And I thought that it seemed a metaphor for her mental illness, as well as just a very cool nature sighting, so her entry says something like, you know, the one is barking in the sun, one is running in the rain, and then she goes, how many foxes are there in England, is what she wrote at the end, which is just this sort of lovely way of a graceful sentence. So I was reading the writer's diary from Virginia Woolf without any idea that I was reading for research for my paintings, because the last thing I expected was a sort of natural history reference or a wild animal reference. So that was reading I was simply doing because I'm a great admirer of her writing. So sometimes the ideas come from very surprising kind of, and then sometimes the reading is very focused. So I will say have an idea to paint a particular animal, like right now I'm painting a wild boar. I did focused reading about wild boars in nature, and I found out that their social organization, wild pigs, wild boars, they're completely, it's a matriarchy. That even though the big males are very formidable, they're basically just sperm delivery systems. And that's why they're so big. They can defend themselves because they're basically protecting their own genetic material. So a male is almost useless and they don't join in the family groups at all. So, in once I learned that, I will sort of let dream processes sort of at work, a sort of hypnagogic state. I'll try to access the image in a way that will give me. I'll try to come up with an image. So in this case, I have a very large, probably sleeping male wild boar. He could be sleeping, he could be dying. Nobody needs to know. But on top of this wild boar is a female who's teaching her young. She's using his body as a kind of lectern, a stage to run the classroom from. So he's passive, and it overturns this sort of traditional way that wild boars have been painted in Western art. Always has to do with hunting scenes where the male wild boar is besieged by dogs and has killed a few. And those scenes I actually put in the background of this painting. And in the foreground, I've put the matriarchy with the passive male. So there's different, I guess what I'm trying to say by bringing those two paintings up is there's different ways that the ideas come from the literature that I'm reading. Sometimes just surprisingly from some place and sometimes it is very focused research-based practice where it's like I want to paint wild boars. What do I know about them? Nothing. I need to read up on them. And what's funny about my process is that I think a lot of people could imagine it as being very tedious because the very expressive moments come in the drawing stages where I can do really rough sketches, gestural drawings, and then start to make small watercolor studies based on those. And then go to the Museum of Natural History, maybe draw from dioramas, draw from the animal itself. All of those moments can seem very exciting and full of exploration and new discovery. And then I will have locked down a concept and actually just need to execute at this point. So it's a little more like, say, filmmaking, which I studied, where it's nice to have a storyboard. Sometimes not everybody works this way, but many filmmakers, a guy like Martin Scorsese, every shot is known before when they show up at the set. They know what they're going to do, and that's not to say there's other ways of working are fine, exploring. But mine, the surprises don't necessarily come in the execution of the painting. I'm trying to create an effect, and I want that effect. And so the actual painting has control to some degree, a sort of as much as you can when you're painting with watercolor. I still allow certain things to happen, but they're like deliberate accidents. In other words, there's techniques where you wet the paper and then you let and I use those techniques and let the watercolor bleed into the paper and it goes the way it's going to go. But I will often use that expressively, like in the sky or in the underpainting. So it is true that what keeps me going, I guess, is just a continuous fascination with the magic trick itself. I'm not even pretending that it isn't sort of a trick. And that was the thing that the modernists, especially abstract painters and people like Ad Reinhardt, was making fun of figurative painting for being a bunch of tricks, cheap tricks that fool the eye into thinking they're seeing into a three-dimensional world. And I'm like, yeah, why not? Or people will say, well, how is this not illustration? And I'm like, I'm not saying it isn't like illustration. And I'm also saying that the Renaissance was illustration of the Bible, for example. Like, what is the Sistine Chapel but a big illustration? Oh, there's the Last Judgment. What makes that an interesting work of art is that the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel is actually not about the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. It's about Michelangelo's obsession with the male form, with his homosexual love of the male body, and a huge expression of that on a church wall. It's hilarious and outrageous and perfect. So nature, the little scraps of nature I found in the suburbs were also a refuge from my own discomfort growing up, which was just, I don't know, anxious kid. I had a very sweet relationship with my siblings and with my mother. My father was, which I inherited from him. I'm an alcoholic, but I've recovered from my alcoholism for 11 years now. And it's always just a day-to-day thing, but this is right now, it's no interest in drinking again. My father was a lifelong alcoholic and a big, powerful, and with a very big temper and a great passionate love as well. Like, he was very affectionate, but also occasionally violent and terrifying and drunk. And he had a conscience, he was remorseful, but it was very unpredictable. You didn't know what you were going to get. He was a big man, like 6'2", big football player, built like me. It was a lot of power in this guy. And I was in love with him and afraid of him at the same time. So sometimes I had to just get the hell away. And he introduced me to the wilderness and the idea of knowing the animals and the plants and being a good fisherman, being able to handle fishing rods and guns and boats and things, like I can take care of myself in the forest. And that was a valued thing. If I have a fishing rod, I won't starve, in New England, at least. I know what to do. So, and I used to do crazy things like that on my own. I would hitchhike to the White Mountains in New Hampshire with not very much food and a fly rod. And I would eat trout for a week. And I had brought some bread and some things with me, but not a lot. And then I would, hitchhike home. And I would be super proud of myself. Like all my protein I caught myself and ate. Little brook trout like this. So that was it was both, my father both introduced me to this, but also was one of the reasons why I was climbing a tree to get away from things. He was a bully sometimes, and also he put us to work. It'd be like you'd be doing lawn work all weekend instead of playing with your friends. And then I'm going to school, and it was like, shit, I'm done with school, and then I go home to boot camp. So I was trying to get away from him a bit, sometimes. Well, in a weird way, when I was a child, I was doing work that was very similar to the work I'm doing now. Strangely, it's true. When I was a little kid, I drew animals and violent scenes of dinosaurs fighting and things like this. Very, very accomplished kind of child prodigy drawings from my childhood. But actually, when I went to art school, it felt like very much not the thing to be doing. So I had some contempt for my gifts and for the direction that I was headed. And I turned away from that and tried to become a film student. And I did some videos that were in the style of William Wegman videos. I did some acting at Brown University. I sang with bands a little bit. I tried to not actually make paintings about animals. It felt like the urge was there always, but it felt uncool. And so there was a point when I was young when I had contempt for what I was good at. And then I just found my way back to painting. And my first paintings that I did sort of in New York after I graduated from art school had more to do with my childhood and growing up, and also to do with my southern ancestry, the plantation houses and things that were in my family history that were very dark pages in American history that I wanted to confront, and that my own people with a face like mine were involved in. So I would do self-implicating pieces about slavery even, and about, just because my great-grandmother, I guess, she wrote a journal, or she wrote a little, the family published thing, the autobiography of Emily Donaldson Walton, And she was in the family that settled Nashville, Tennessee in the 18th century with my ancestors. And so I would make art about that, because it was about, even my name was there. So I wasn't trying to turn away from the darker parts of American history that were in my family, because my family's been here since the beginning. So then, after turning my back on this for many years, I started to do my own Audubon paintings. I did them. They just seemed amusing to make a sort of comment on this stuff I grew up with. And I didn't at first think to exhibit them. I kind of still was thinking, well, these are just watercolors. And there's some idea that painting had to do with oil paint. You needed to make a big smell and be covered with paint to be a real painter. But then I realized, like, I can make these watercolors quite easily that look something like Audubon. So I thought, I'm going to make it very difficult. And eventually, a couple of things happened. I went to India with my first wife, got a fellowship to study there, and we went for 6 months. And when I was in Jaipur, there was a painting of a tiger, a life-size painting of a tiger that the Maharaja had shot. That was done in the style of Indian miniatures, but it was 10 feet long because it was a life-size tiger. And he had copied the stripes. Rather than have a stuffed head or a skin, to show that he actually did, the artist did a portrait of the tiger that the Maharaja had shot in life size. And I just thought, this is one of the coolest things I've ever looked at. And I thought, I want to make one, basically. I want to make a life size painting of a tiger. And so I did when I got home. And it turned out really well. And it turned out to be so difficult that it kept me on edge, even though I was going along with what came naturally. I had been painting watercolors of animals since I was 7, probably, and I had quite a bit of facility at this. But then, if you're painting a 10-foot by 5-foot life-size tiger, I don't care how good you are at this, who you are, it's going to be a challenge. But also, I had studied in Italy my senior year at Rhode Island School of Design, and was more moved by Giotto paintings in the Arena Chapel, and especially in the Assisi, the ones about St. Francis, and all the attendant artists that are in that Assisi church, which are like Simone Martini and the Lorenzetti, all of these Trecento artists, and they moved me. And they made these giant life-size pictures of the saints doing these different things in a comic book style, narrative painting. And I thought, I want to make narrative pictures. So the idea of making a life-size narrative painting about a tiger, it was like everything came together. This is all the things I loved doing when I was a kid, but on the edge of being able, possibility. And the frescoes taught me that you can make this. Because a fresco is very much like a watercolor. When you make a mark, it soaks into the plaster. And it's gone. It's done. You don't make revisions. You don't erase. So certain things, marble carving, fresco painting, and watercolor, you move forward. But you can't move back. So it's not like clay, you remodel the clay, or oil, you scrape out what you did if you don't like it and start again tomorrow. You rub it out with turpentine or something and start again. So, but you don't start again with watercolor. So you need to plan everything ahead of time. And this suited my personality. So this idea of being on the edge of survival kind of while you're painting these things and having a high stakes activity, it felt everything clicked. This is giving me all the thrills that I could hope for. It's a very big wave surfing kind of way to paint a picture. There's no, you're not allowed to fuck up. My hope would be that, like, for example, the painting I'm working on now, there's a essay called The Teddy Bear Patriarchy, which is about the Museum of Natural History dioramas, which are primarily show a central male figure standing up, upright, sort of very strong central male figure, and female with young at the often reclining. And this is a fairly common trope in natural history art in general. A big, strong male who's guarding the females and the female and the young. And what a lot of natural history research has discovered is that there's just as many matriarchies as there are patriarchies in the natural world. And I'm interested in using the traditional natural history modes of representation to sometimes represent the more recent discoveries, but also to allow my paintings to speak to the moment that we're in. And so I don't want to rip from the headline thing. I don't want to refer to a newspaper moment exactly, but I do realize that the paintings couldn't have been made at a different time, that the narratives that I'm interested in exploring have to do with the way we look at things now in some degree, or how it couldn't be otherwise, but there's less of a reactionary, anachronistic attitude towards art in my practice than people might be led to believe by the way they look. I was given these gifts for a reason. I have no idea really what the deal is with them. I can draw and paint the way I can. It was what my talent was. I tried a lot of other things, film and acting and music and a lot of different art forms. This is what I'm really, really good at. So I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it almost grudgingly because I wanted something more contemporary to do. But this is what, I'm a realist painter. I'm really good at that. But I can definitely make realist paintings that have never been made before. And that's the point. So my project has more to do with how animals live. I've said it many times, but I'll say it again. It's how animals live in the human imagination, either mine or a collective folkloric imagination. But it's about the imagined animal from a human POV more. Even when I'm in the animal's point of view, when I'm really, it's usually an animal that's caught up in the human point of view. In other words, like I did a painting of a giraffe. One of the first giraffes to come to America there were only 2 that survived out of 11 that were brought over in a ship in the 1830s. And I painted the giraffe on the deck of the ship in the 1830s, really to just point out her point of view. How did this giraffe feel in the middle of the ocean on a boat? What a weird place for a giraffe to end up being, going to New York from South Africa. So it's like the climate, everything. No wonder out of 11, only 2 made it. So the one that made it, I thought about, how did she make it? She made it because she probably sat down on the deck. She didn't kick. She didn't struggle. She didn't break a leg doing that. She just sat and calmly dealt with the situation. That's how animals make it. And went ahead and ate when it was being fed instead of refusing food. This was the survivor. So I wanted to paint the calm survivor on the deck of this ship. So it's really her point of view, but it's not as well, because it's like she wouldn't be there on her own. This isn't her world. So I'm not painting the nature exactly. I'm painting our fraught relationship with it. And what's to be learned, I don't know. Anything that I learn, well, that's the kind of thing I learn. What did the world look like to that giraffe when it was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? How did it feel? That's really enough curiosity for me to want to make a picture. I'm going to take a chance now. I'm going to take a little chance because I have a sort of faith that is not, there's a scientific aspect to me being interested in nature, but there's also a spiritual dimension to that. And so I've said it before in interviews, but I'll say it again. Robert Thurman, who is the Buddhist scholar, he is a translator of Tibetan Buddhist texts and has this thing called the Tibet Center here in New York and has translated for the Dalai Lama and all of this kind of stuff. And he knows my work, and when he met me, said that the animals have a reason to communicate and that I was a channel for that. And that it's not to do with artistic ego or talent or getting rich or selling pictures or becoming famous or any of that. That it's about these animals have their own agenda and that I am a sort of incarnation to deal with that. So that because he said, when I look at the animals, the eyes of the animals, I believe that they have life and communicatory, whatever, and that you don't even have to be aware of that, like it's sort of just happening. So when I heard that from Robert Thurman, I thought, is there anything about that idea that could have a detrimental effect to my art? And I thought, no, actually, on the contrary, if there's a humility it could bring to it, like, okay, this isn't about me. This is about me trying to learn from the animal that is in front of me that happens to come through my hand but isn't mine. So if I could sort of say, is this teaching me something? And is this going to lead me somewhere? And when this thing begins to feel like it has the spark of life, is there something in there that I don't even understand myself? And is this going to hurt the work? And I thought it could only help the work to sort of fake it till you make it. Try to believe what Robert Thurman told me is true. And so I, even just in an actory way, decided I'm going to go into character. I'm going to pretend I believe this, that these animals are trying to speak through me. And I'm going to honor that. And I'm going to act like... So all it did was give me a huge reverence for the actual creature that I'm painting. I was like, oh man, now I have a big responsibility. I can't mess this up for this, because the wild boars have something to say about this. This is their story. I've got to do a good job. And so it was a very beautiful way for me to access the sort of spiritual side of this thing, and without feeling like, oh, I have a message from the beyond or some kind of middleman between God and everyone else. I don't believe in making artists seem like superior beings in any way. But in a way, if you really listen to what Robert Thurman was saying, he was saying the opposite. He was actually saying, you have no ego in this. This isn't your creation, and this isn't you've just been picked lottery-wise to do this, kind of like and maybe given the gifts to do it for that reason, because this has to be done at this moment in time. And I was like, it's such a small audience. How could it make that big a difference? But then I thought, wait a minute, what is the small audience? Some of the wealthiest people in one of the biggest cities that's most disconnected from nature, this kind of thing, like international global art collectors who flew to buy my painting on a private jet or something like that. Maybe those are the people that these paintings should live in their homes and speak directly to them. So I thought, I'm not going to glorify the importance of the work. And I'm not even going to say that what Robert Thurman said is true. But I am going to say, why wouldn't I take myself out of it a little bit? Why wouldn't I actually make myself more humble in the face of what I'm up to? And so that's how I like to look at it. So I guess the short answer was like, yeah, this is work that needs to be made now, because this is what we're up against. These are the other sentient beings that we share the planet with, and that we don't know almost anything about. And the interesting thing about everything about animal cognitive study, you very rarely hear these animals were a lot simpler and stupider than we thought. It's always, the big argument is, are we smart enough to know how smart these animals are? Can we figure out what's going on here? Because it's way more complicated than we ever thought. And that seems to be every single breakthrough in science is showing us. These animals are smarter than we thought. These animals are smart. These animals live in family groups. They do this, they do that. Fish socializing with each other, having very complicated communication systems and social networks and hierarchies and all of this kind of stuff. Way more intelligence there than we thought. Stuff like that, and we had written these animals off as almost like without feelings, without any kind of cognitive abilities at all, So it does seem like exactly the right moment to be making the work, and even making it in this anachronistic way so that it reaches the widest possible audience. It's a popular type of painting. So I have been fortunate to be able to have this property be in my care for a little while. There's 240 acres here, some old growth forest, a trout stream, 3 ponds, 2 of them are beaver ponds that are very beautiful. So it's a great responsibility. I'm doing nothing to the land except I opened up some meadow and some new forest so that the birds would come. But other than that, there's nothing to do here but let it be and not log it and not try to do anything to it, not develop it. So this part feels very good, that I get to steward the land for a little while. I don't know what'll happen after I go, but I'm going to try to maybe arrange it so it's not developed after I'm gone. I have a lot of projects I want to do that I haven't gotten to. I am in the middle of writing a children's book that I'm very fond of. And I have an idea for a film that I want to make at some point about Audubon, because I understand him better than maybe any living artist would. I could argue that I know Audubon better than anybody. I know what it felt like to make the things he made. And that puts me in touch with him in a way. And I've thought a lot about him, so I want to make a film about him at some point. Everything is fleeting. Everything is changing. Always. And so in my belief system, the way I look at the world, there's something that doesn't change, observing all of this. And people call it God, whatever they want to call it. But the unchanging that is in observation of the changing is the basic thing that keeps me from being pessimistic. So that the way people access this is by living in the moment. If you're not thinking of the future and you're not thinking of the past, neither thing is real. What is real is this moment that we're in right now. And everything else is just a construction in my mind. Something I think I remember, but is very unreliable. Something I imagine might happen, which is always wrong. I never predict the future correctly. I knew an old woman from the South, and she said she knew an old man. She would tell stories about herself, but she's like, she would not say it was her. She would say, I know this guy. I knew this fellow, she said, and every day he woke up at the foot of his bed, he had a note that said, it's not going to happen that way. And then he went into the bathroom to brush his teeth, and on the mirror in front of him, it said, it's not going to happen that way either. And that, to me, is how if I'm going to be pessimistic, it's going to be that. It's all bullshit. It's my own stupid-ass construction. And I don't choose to go there. Yeah, the evidence shows that this and that. So the human race eliminates itself, and then nature continues. Evolution continues. You know, there was an asteroid strike on the fucking dinosaurs. And we're doing the asteroid strike on ourselves. So what? But the life will continue. I miss the animals that are... I wish I could see an ivory-billed woodpecker or a great auk or a thylacine. I wish I could see those things. My images do mourn, they do function sometimes from a place of grief. And my spiritual idea of observing, detached observation of a conscious presence, which is the meditation practice that saved my life, it doesn't mean that when we're in the world, we are not active and manifest in the world. The world then brings me grief. I lose people I love. I mean, before we're born, where the fuck are we, right? We don't grieve whatever state we were before we were born. Something happens after we're dead that's none of our business, obviously. And it doesn't matter. But I don't want to waste my time thinking that it's bad news. I don't know what kind of news it is to die. There's a Hindu teacher, Papaji. He told a story about this idea that the bubble in the lake thinks it's an independent being. The bubble is floating around, independent, beautiful, iridescent, floating on the top of the lake. I can go wherever I want. The wind blows me. I go, I'm a bubble. I'm a bubble. That's who I am. I'm a bubble. The bubble pops. It goes back into the lake. It was never anything but the lake. The bubble is not something unbelievable by itself. It's the lake. So like, I think that's what we are like. I have my ego bubble. I think it's very important and I'm allowed to enjoy it. Why not enjoy being a bubble? But you know you're made of the lake. The lake, you pop and you go back to where you came from. And it doesn't need to be more complicated than that for me. Look at the bubble, my metaphor.